There is a plateau in the coastal desert of southern Peru covered in drawings. Not small drawings. Not rock art you crouch down to examine. Drawings so large that the hummingbird alone is 300 feet from wingtip to wingtip. The condor's wingspan is 440 feet. The monkey's tail curls across 300 feet of desert floor. The spider is the size of a football field. A single straight line runs for 9 miles across the desert, without deviating by more than a few feet. From the ground, these drawings are essentially invisible. Standing beside one of the lines, you see a shallow trench of pale earth between low borders of dark stones. You cannot tell what it is. You cannot tell what it is part of. The full figure only becomes visible from altitude, from several hundred feet above the desert floor at minimum. The people who made them lived 2,000 years before the first aircraft flew. Ancient Andean oral traditions passed down across generations describe the lines as pathways for the gods, messages sent upward to divine beings who look down from the sky. Modern astronomy has found that many of the figures align with specific star positions as they appeared over Peru at the time the lines were made. The ancient texts said these were made for eyes above. 2,000 years later, we built machines that could finally get above them. And what we saw confirmed everything the texts described. The Andean civilizations that preceded and surrounded the Nazca did not leave written texts in the European sense. Their sacred knowledge was preserved in oral tradition, in the quipu system of knotted recording cords, and in the religious frameworks that Spanish colonizers documented in the 16th century before systematically destroying as much of them as possible. What survived of those traditions describes a cosmology in which the world above, the sky and the stars, was populated by divine beings called huacas who governed every aspect of the natural world. Rain, crops, rivers, mountains, and the movement of celestial bodies were all expressions of huaca activity. Human beings maintained their relationship with the huacas through ceremony, offering, and communication. The communication was not metaphorical. The ancient Andean worldview treated the sky as a literally inhabited place, a world above the human world, populated by beings who could observe the earth below and who responded to what they saw there. Ceremonies were not performed in enclosed sacred spaces primarily. They were performed in open places, under open sky, visible from above. The Sique system of the Inca, who came centuries after the Nazca but preserved older Andean religious frameworks, describes a network of sacred lines radiating outward from the Temple of the Sun in Cusco in every direction, each line connecting sacred sites and organizing ceremonial activity across the landscape. The lines were not just paths, they were communications infrastructure between the human world and the divine one. The Nazca lines predate the Inca by over 1,000 years, but the religious logic is identical. Lines on the earth, made deliberately, oriented to the sky, functioning as the medium through which humans reached upward toward the gods they believed were looking down. The Nazca culture flourished in the river valleys of the southern Peruvian coast from approximately 100 BC to 800 AD. They were not a primitive desert people. They were sophisticated agriculturalists who solved one of the most difficult engineering challenges of the ancient Americas. The southern Peruvian coast is one of the driest places on Earth. The rivers that flow down from the Andes to the coast run underground for much of the year, absorbed into the deep gravel beds of the desert floor before they reach the sea. A civilization trying to farm this landscape faced an existential water problem. The Nazca solved it by building puquios, an underground aqueduct system of spiral-topped shafts and tunnels that accessed the subsurface water flow and channeled it to the surface for agricultural use. Over 30 of these ancient aqueducts still function today, still delivering water to Nazca Valley farmers using the same system their ancestors built 2,000 years ago. They were recently recognized as one of the most significant feats of ancient hydraulic engineering in South America. This is important context for understanding the lines. The civilization that made the geoglyphs was not a desperate or struggling culture scraping survival from a hostile desert. It was a prosperous, technically sophisticated society with the organizational capacity to build infrastructure that is still working 2 millennia later. The Nazca lines were not made by people with nothing else to do. They were made by people with the resources, the organization, and the religious motivation to commit generations of labor to a project of extraordinary scale. The practical method of creating the Nazca lines has been experimentally confirmed and is less mysterious than popular accounts suggest, though no less impressive. The lines were made by removing the dark reddish-brown iron oxide-coated stones that cover the desert surface and piling them along the edges of the cleared areas, revealing the pale yellowish ground beneath. The contrast between the dark surface stones and the pale subsoil creates the visible lines. The desert conditions of the Nazca Plateau, almost no rain, no wind strong enough to redistribute the stones, and stable temperatures, have preserved the lines for 2,000 years with almost no deterioration. The geometric precision of the lines has been the subject of most speculation, but experimental archaeology has shown it is achievable with basic tools. Wooden stakes and cords allow the projection of straight lines across any distance. Scaling up a smaller design using a grid system allows the accurate enlargement of any figure to any size. Both techniques were within the capabilities of any organized ancient culture, and both have been demonstrated to work on the Nazca Plateau by researchers recreating sections of the lines. What the practical explanation does not address is the question of design. The figures were designed to be seen from above. That design decision, the choice to create something at a scale and orientation that only makes full sense from altitude, is not explained by the engineering method. The engineering tells us how. The ancient texts are the only source that tells us why. Decades of systematic research into the Nazca lines have produced findings that align remarkably closely with what the ancient Andean texts described. Astronomer Phyllis Pitluga, working with the Adler Planetarium, conducted a detailed computer analysis of the Nazca spider geoglyph and found that it precisely maps the constellation Orion as it appeared over the Nazca Plateau around 300 AD, with the spider's body and legs corresponding to specific stars in the constellation. The extended leg of the spider, often noted as anatomically strange, points precisely to the path of the star Mintaka as it rose and set over the Nazca horizon. The condor figure aligns with the Milky Way as it appeared over Peru during the period the lines were made. The hummingbird aligns with the Pleiades star cluster, which in Andean tradition governed the agricultural calendar and the timing of planting. The monkey, found in the most northern section of the plateau, has a tail that traces the path of the star group associated with the rainy season in Andean cosmology. These are not random correspondences. The ancient Andean texts describe the sky as a map of everything that governed life on Earth. The Nazca lines were not just messages sent upward. They were the Earth mirroring the sky, the human world reflecting the Divine One back at the gods above, saying, "We see what you have shown us. We have drawn it here so you know we understand." The lines were a conversation. Ancient scripture described the language. Archaeology found the words. Here is where the science of the Nazca line stands today, and what it confirms about the ancient texts that describe them. The lines were made by the Nazca culture over a period of approximately 1,000 years using simple but precisely applied tools. That is confirmed. The astronomical alignments of multiple figures with specific star positions as they appeared over Peru during the period of construction are confirmed by multiple independent analyses. The connection between the figures and Andean sacred cosmology, the huacas, the secas, the sky as a populated divine world, is confirmed by the surviving oral and recorded traditions of Andean civilization. What that confirmation means is significant. The ancient Andean people who described the lines as communications with the gods above were not speaking metaphorically about a vague spiritual impulse. They were describing a precise, technically sophisticated, astronomically informed practice of sacred communication that they maintained for 1,000 years, and that their descendants remembered accurately enough that when modern astronomy analyzed the figures, the alignments the traditions described were actually there. The lines were made for eyes above. The ancient texts said so. The astronomy confirms it. The only question that remains open is exactly whose eyes those were understood to be. The Nazca did not need aircraft to know that something above them was watching. They had their texts, they had their sky, and they had a desert that preserved their message for 2,000 years until we finally built something that could get high enough to read it. Tell me in the comments, do you think these civilizations were erased by accident or on purpose?